Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 56. The first book today is The Flyers, In Search of Wilbur and Orville Wright by Noah Adams, 2003. This is an amazing book, of course, about these amazing brothers who were able to create the first airplane, had the first airplane flight. And that took place on December 17th, 1903 at 2:35 a.m. at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in the Outer Banks, the first airplane flight. These two brothers, they were collaborators. They worked together. Wilbur and Orville Wright from Dayton, Ohio. Wilbur sadly died relatively young. Wilbur was older, and actually all the stress that they were under, once they became famous and accomplished and so forth, then there were lawsuits and too much work. He died relatively young. He died in 1912, only 9 years after this flight. And so that was tough on Orville, who lived many years after that, lived till 1948. Their parents were Susan Catherine Horner Wright and Bishop Milton Wright. I believe the mother died some relatively young, but the father played an important role. Although he traveled a lot, he was a traveling minister, he was on the road a lot. And then there was another sibling, a sister named Catherine. So the first flight in history, the first airplane flight in history, was 12 seconds long, and they traveled 120 feet. And then the fourth flight, they kept making attempts, and the fourth flight was 59 seconds. And they traveled 852 feet in a 20-mile-per-hour wind. So North Carolina. So they traveled to North Carolina because they thought it would be. They wanted a place where there was a beach, where they could have soft landings, where it could be flat, and where there would be some wind. So that's why they did. So they traveled all the way from Dayton, Ohio, to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Now their work was they owned a bicycle store. They made bicycles, they repaired them as well. That was their business. Great inventors, and they combined science, creativity, and determination to make history. This book also talks about the U.S. Gypsy Queen Matilda Stanley, who died in 1878 and was buried in Dayton, Ohio. And the king of the Gypsy Queen was King Levi. And then they were very close to each other. Wilbur and Orville never got married. And then this sister, Catherine, they were all very close. Then Catherine got married to a guy named Harry Haskell. She went to Oberlin College, and they were married in November of 1926. And then, by this time, Wilbur had been gone. And then Orville, was really close. He was mad that she got married. And so she was kind of torn between her husband and her brother, and kind of this created problems for her mentally. She was really upset about this, about this. And then she died relatively young. She died in 1929, only after 3 years of marriage. And when I read this book in the Philippines, and it says that there's a small marble fountain outside the art museum at Oberlin, which is a memorial for her. And so that stayed in my mind. And I happened to be visiting Oberlin back in 2014, and a friend of mine with Bob Kinsey, and we went to that art museum. And then it all, my mind, door light went on in my mind. Oh, the memorial fountain for the Wright brothers' sister. And so I found the fountain and found the engraving for her name, and I was real happy about that. So this is a wonderful book. But a number of books written on the Wright brothers. They're incredible people. Really, really, it's amazing what they did, because they're very, very determined. And sadly, though, when they were able to when they became successful, that's when it was the one brother was working too hard. Yeah, Wilbur was working too hard, and that led to his death. So it was very tragic. And anyway, the next book is Jelly's Blues, The Life, Music, and Redemption of Jelly Roll Morton by Howard Reich and William Gaines, 2003. This is an amazing book, an incredible book, and it has a lot of history of music. According to this book, During slavery days in the United States, the slaves, one of the things they did is they comforted themselves for the hardships they went through in slavery through music. And they, during their free time, they would sing and play musical instruments. And so there was a lot of, they really developed that talent, because, and it really helped comfort them during those hard times. And then when slavery ended, a lot of that meant, the freed African Americans could move around. And then New Orleans became a place where a lot of them moved to, the city life. And New Orleans became really a musical capital, musical mecca. And there are all these African Americans who were collaborating after the Civil War and working together and developing musically. And then Jelly Roll Morton, who was considered the inventor of jazz music, and he was around 1905 in New Orleans, so he was part of that tradition. First name was Ferdinand. They called him Jelly Roll. He was born in 1885 and died in 1941. He was Creole, half French, half African descent. And so initially the music that he was creating was for funeral dirges, parades and street parades, and also music to be played in the houses of prostitution in New Orleans. He became very famous, wealthy and famous, and he traveled to New Orleans. While he was in New Orleans, he traveled to Chicago, New York City, and Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles. Sadly, he was betrayed by two white brothers, his business partners, who became rich from his musical writing and composing. And then late in life, he had a white friend named Roy Carew, who joined his battle for justice to restore his name and income, which succeeded only after his death. Musical genius. God bless Jelly Roll Morton. So, according to this book, that really jazz and blues, that you could say that Jelly Roll Morton was one of the guys who helped create jazz and blues. And jazz led to rock and roll led to other music forms. So the author makes the case that popular music around the world today started with African American slaves and the music they made during slavery days. And then it was in New Orleans that it really started to evolve. When these musicians from all over the South could come together and collaborate. And that Jelly Roll Morton played a very important role in this. So, wow, an amazing, wonderful history book. The next book is I Was Howard Hughes by Stephen Carter, 2003. This is another amazing book. Howard Hughes is an American man. He was born in 1905, died in 1976. He did a lot of things. He was a manufacturer, a pilot, movie producer. He was born in Houston, Texas. At age 21, he became extremely wealthy because he inherited the Hughes Tool Company, makers of oil well drill bits. So that's, he started with some money, a large amount of money. But, he used it. He was a very brilliant fellow. He owned TWA Airlines, the RKO movie company. In 1938, he set a world record. He flew around the world in 91 hours and 14 minutes. So apparently that broke the previous record. As a movie producer, Hughes produced movies such as Hell's Angels in 1930, The Outlaw in 1940. He was the richest America in the United States in the 1960s and 1970s. The thing is, there's a fairly recent movie with Leonardo DiCaprio portraying Hughes. He developed mental problems. The last 20 years of his life, he spent alone in hotel rooms in Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Bahamas, London, Vancouver, Managua, Nicaragua, and Acapulco, Mexico. So he developed mental illness. Very sad. He was a Valium and codeine addict. Tragic. And during these times, it shows this in the movie. He would watch movies nonstop. He also produced the movies Scarface and The Front Page, and that as I mentioned, that flying record. He cut the previous record of Wiley Post flying around the world in half. In 1947, Howard Hughes built the largest airplane, I believe the largest airplane ever. He called it the Spruce Goose. It was as long as a football field. During his life, he was into flying. He had 14 head injuries over the years, and I wonder how that affected him. Well, he had a lot of women in his life. He developed venereal disease, including syphilis, which damaged his nervous system. He also had severe hearing loss. He had a lot of famous women in his life, including Katharine Hepburn, Rita Hayworth, Ava Gardner, Lana Turner, Janet Leigh, Gloria Vanderbilt, and Marilyn Monroe. He was hated by President Richard Nixon, and he hired a guy who looked like him named Brooks Randall, a look-alike. He was hired, and since Howard Hughes was hounded by the press, so he'd have this guy go out and give press conferences, and then the government would pursue this guy, because they were Hughes was under surveillance as an enemy of Richard Nixon, and then this guy gave him the job to kill Bugsy Siegel, which he wouldn't do. It was like, wait a minute, I'll be your double, but Bugsy Siegel was a guy actually who helped develop, the founder of Las Vegas. He also got this guy to date Ava Gardner. Just imagine, see how crazy Howard Hughes was. He has his double going on dates with Ava Gardner. Howard Hughes was a very rich man. He was a genius. He had a tough childhood. He became self-destructive. He fought Bugsy Siegel in Nevada because I guess he didn't like what turning Las Vegas, creating this gambling mecca. He also fought Walt Disney in Florida. Yeah, he fought against Nevada being turned into a gambling state. He was a brilliant man. The thing is, the thing I found is he had really no spiritual life, and this is really why he degenerated into mental illness. He had all this money and fame, but he had nothing to ground him. So it's ultimately a tragic story, the life of Howard Hughes. Fascinating. Very, very interesting. The next book is Searching for El Dorado by Mark Herman, 2003. It's a very interesting book. It's about gold mining in Guyana, South America. The author tries to understand this poor South American jungle country whose population is partly from India and partly from Africa, African descent, and partly Indians, American Indians. And although there's a lot of gold mining, it doesn't really help. It hasn't been able to help the country to develop. The children give people hope. Everybody wants to leave Guyana. And he wrote this, quote, "It is a country of overwhelming generosity." And I wrote that in Guyana you have cruelty versus the human spirit. Really, poor country. And he gets into the studying the mining business. These miners in Guyana and their lives. Very interesting book. The next book is The Prince of the Marshes and Other Occupational Hazards of a Year in Iraq by Rory Stewart, 2006. So the author was a 30-year-old man from Great Britain, and he spent 20 months walking through somewhere. He was born in Hong Kong, raised in Malaysia, worked in Great Britain, in the British embassies in Indonesia and Yugoslavia, also Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and Nepal. So this guy was really international, all over the world. After the March 2003 American invasion of Iraq, Stewart worked for 1 year, starting in September 2003, as a coalition governor of 2 Iraqi provinces, Amara and then Nasiriyah. He faced political complexities, a culture of hate and violence and dictatorship. He was effective because of his courage, love, and intelligence. Tremendous challenge, trying to bring democracy to a dictator culture. Yeah, this is a very interesting book, the nitty-gritty of a guy who was actually there with leadership. He was not a soldier fighting, but he was trying to help Iraq become a democracy, and very, very challenging. But he did his best. Very interesting book. The next book is Out of Order by Thomas E. Patterson, 1993. Wonderful book. It's a story of American presidential elections since 1960. How, since 1972, and the voters, through primary elections, have decided the nominees, rather than the parties. So before 1972, the voters could not choose who would be the nominee of the party for president, the Democratic and Republican nominee. But now they can, since 1972. Before that, it was party insiders. And what this has meant is that the media has become very, very powerful since then, because the media influences public opinion and who people vote for. The author talks about how since Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, the Vietnam War that was so controversial, and Watergate, the American media has become anti-politicians, influencing the public to become anti-politicians. In other words, their whole, Watergate was this, you could say, the greatest moment in the history of American journalists. They brought down an American president, and they thought, they had power, and they had a sense of self-righteousness. Look how good we are. We fought this evil Richard Nixon. But then that kind of became a habit, where their whole thing was being negative about all politicians and promoting the idea that they're all corrupt. And the problem with this idea is imperiling democracy, and that if the voters think all the candidates are good, then the whole system becomes very weak and shaky. And so anyway, this book talks about how powerful the media is, because the media influences the public opinion, and the people vote for the nominees for each party for president. Very, very interesting book. Wonderful American history. The next book is Jose Rizal, Life, Works, and Writings of a Genius, Writer, Scientist, and National Hero by Gregorio F. Zaide and Sonia M. Zaide, 1994. This is a very wonderful book about the national hero of the Philippines. It talks about his writing, his courage, his patriotism. Unfortunately, he was trying to give Spain the benefit of the doubt. He had, in my opinion, too much faith in Spain, and he was actually against revolution. He was hoping that the Spanish would treat Filipinos better. He also had many women in his life, I think too many women. He tended to be emotional. He traveled a lot. One thing I really enjoyed was the 4 years he spent in Dapitan, Zamboanga del Norte, in Mindanao, and his work there. Death is easy, life is hard. I think that Emilio Aguinaldo I used to believe he was superior. We all have our role to play, and certainly Jose Rizal played such an important role in Philippine history. He was a genius, a great man, not perfect. Sometimes he lacked people skills, and he didn't really know or believe that war was necessary, a war of independence. He had problems being a team player. Very interesting, but certainly his two books, The Noli and the Philly, Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, had a tremendous effect on the Philippines and helping Filipinos believe in themselves, believe that they were a good people, and that they should fight for independence, even though he himself was against. Although those books really promote war, but I guess he was a pacifist. Very, very interesting book. Wonderful man, Jose Rizal, tremendous guy. The next book is There Is No Me Without You by Melissa Fay-Green, 2006. This is a beautiful book. Beautiful. There's this a woman from in Ethiopia. Her name is Hergoin Tefera, middle-aged woman from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in East Africa. And her husband and her daughter both died young. She wasn't married a very long time. Her husband and daughter died, and she was shattered. And they had a tradition in Ethiopia when something like this happened. People would go to a cemetery, and they would just stay there until they died. And she did that for a while, and then I guess she decided she wanted to live. So she left the cemetery, and she built a new life, taking care of AIDS orphans. A lot of people had died in Ethiopia from HIV or AIDS. And so she decided, and there are all these orphans, these children who they lost their parents. And so her mission was, she was taking care of them and trying to help them become adopted by Europeans and Americans. And so you can see that God turned tragedy into triumph, building his kingdom on earth. helping all nations become brothers. So wonderful, very inspiring. How she was this woman who was devastated by tragedy, but she was able to overcome that and did so much good, helping orphans in Ethiopia. Wonderful, amazing book. The next book is Romo, My Life on the Edge. Living Dreams and Slaying Dragons by Bill Romanowski with Adam Schefter and Phil Tao, 2005. This is an NFL football book. This guy, Bill Romanowski, was an NFL linebacker for 16 years. Played for the San Francisco 49ers, Philadelphia Eagles, Denver Broncos, and Oakland Raiders. Maybe they were in Los Angeles. I'm not sure. He's a white guy with ambition who worked harder than anybody else, would seek any advantage to help him. He was very determined. He found fame. He had 20 concussions, and also brain damage, so he paid the price. Eventually, after his career, he became a movie star. He was in the movies Longest Yard and Benchwarmers. He explored acupuncture and various health innovations. So this was the thing that I thought was interesting about this book, is that this fellow, he's trying to succeed in the NFL, which is very tough. And, he played for 16 years. Every year there's new guys coming out of college, challenging the older guys for their jobs. So, you have to, so he was really thinking, what can I do to keep playing in the NFL and to be successful? So he was really interested in diet and doing things for his health, and very open to anything that might help. So I thought that itself was very, very interesting. I enjoyed that book. The next book is My Ear at His Heart, Reading My Father by Hanif Qureshi, 2004. It's a very interesting book. The author was born in England, and he had a Pakistani father and an English mother. So that made, this was tough. He's growing up in England, but his father's from Pakistan. And his parents, they have cultural differences. He had a very difficult relationship with his father, and he experienced racism in England, feeling lost. And thing is, during his growing up years, England had lost its empire. So the people of Great Britain, there was sort of depression. That's why they say James Bond became popular in England to kind of to help the English feel better. And so there's this conflict. And he talks about the moral deterioration in England. He found solace in writing. So this is the life of an immigrant in Great Britain. From specifically, he's the life of an immigrant's son. His father was an immigrant, so being raised by an immigrant, and it's a unique experience. And this cultural conflict, because Pakistan and England are very different countries. So very, very interesting book. The next book is Angels and Demons by Dan Brown, 2000. Well, of course, Dan Brown wrote the famous book Da Vinci Code, and his formula is history, adventure, and exotic historical locations. Now, this historical novel, it's a thriller set in Rome and the Vatican. It has plenty of Catholic Church history. Talks about the enemies of the Catholic Church, including scientists. There's plenty of danger. In the book, the characters, they go to the different churches in Rome. The death of a pope is depicted, and the College of Cardinals electing a new pope. There's an angry Muslim, a troubled priest, a Harvard symbologist. I think this guy who is played by, I think his name is Langdon, something Langdon. It's played by Tom Hanks in the movies. There's a plot to destroy the Vatican, murdered cardinal's heroism. And so a real adventure book with plenty of history and adventure. And he mentions that in 1857, Pope Pius IX, using a chisel and mallet, hacked off the penis and testicles of every male statue in the Vatican because he thought they might incite lust. So that's kind of an interesting, obscure thing from history that Dan Brown mentioned in this book. Very, very interesting. The next book is The Search for the Pink-Headed Duck, A Journey into the Himalayas and Down the Brahmaputra River by Rory Nugent, 1991. Yeah, I love this book. I really did. The author had a big adventure in northeast India, in the mountains, and he traveled by a river. He met holy men and Tibetans, Gurkhas, and experienced plenty of danger from big cats, like panthers, crocodiles, and pirates. He's a very brave man, and basically he decided to have this is like a travel book, and he thought, well, I have to have a purpose behind this trip, so he decided to look for this very rare duck, the pink-headed duck, a special duck, and he experienced the spirituality of India and Tibet. Very brave guy. I think the toughest part was when he was passing through Bangladesh, which is a very poor country, very highly, tremendous, huge population. And I know he was on a boat, going through, traveling through Bangladesh, and I know it was uncomfortable. There was a lot of hostility because he was passing through some severe poverty-stricken areas. And that was tough. Some people really, really poor. I really like that book. The next book is Closer Than Your Skin: Unwrapping the Mystery of Intimacy with God by Susan Donaldson Hill, 2008. Yeah, this book was written by a family friend, the Donaldson family. I actually grew up with her. The author's brother was a very good friend of me, Rick Donaldson, and the author's parents were very good friends of my parents. Anyway, I learned about this book, and I asked if I could have a copy, and so she sent me one personally inscribed, and it was mailed to me by the author, Sue Donaldson Hill. And this is an incredible book. It's all about making friends with God. Yeah, wow. She talks about Martha versus Mary Magdalene. The two disciples. Mary, who was very Martha, was very hardworking, and very, very busy, and then Mary Magdalene, who just wanted to spend time with Jesus. The author talks about recovering from childhood wounds, looking for direction from God, and following what He wants. The power of prayer for others. Making God your best friend through constant conversation, listening for His subtle words, making the effort to know God. And I thought this was, I'm in Self-Realization Fellowship. I thought it was the best non-SRF spiritual book I've ever read. So these wonderful family friends of mine, very powerful book. It's funny, she talks about her spiritual life and what she went through over the years, and how she was got involved with service work and found herself overwhelmed, when you try to help people, it can be real tough. And she was praying for more and more people, all these people she was praying for. She was trying so hard to be a good person, and eventually she became, it was just too much for her. So, we do have to, know our limits. But she was talking about having this relationship with God, talking to God, and trying to establish a relationship. Very often we don't feel anything coming from Him. And she really wanted to have a vibrant Christianity, not just something that was lukewarm. She talked about how Christmas Eve, the carols were so familiar and beloved, and how people would sing them with so much enthusiasm. But then during the year, very often the hymns that were sung, people didn't know them very well, so there wasn't that same strong spirit. She's written, I know, at least one other book, and this book has had a very positive effect on the world, and you can see she's really tried to do good with her life, and I think it's wonderful. I think it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. It appears we're out of time. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you find a good book to read, and see you later, alligator. In a while, crocodile. Take care, and I'll see you next time.